This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by Deracheha and the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of their commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. This podcast series has been graciously sponsored by Sigal and Zach in honor of Women's Talmud Torah, Women's Halacha Study, and in merit of Am Yisrael. This conversation speaks about the mitzvah of hadlakat nerot, lighting Shabbat candles, its purpose, how do we fulfill it, and the nature of women's connection to this particular mitzvah. This episode will lead us into our next one on lighting Hanukkah candles and the various elements that connect these two different mitzvot. Hi, Shayna.
Hi, Yosefa.
I want to place this episode in the series as it's developed so far until now. We had a whole bunch of episodes on tefillah in the sense of our obligation and explanation of different elements and sections of the tefillah. And then we kind of culminated last week in an episode about communal prayer, which I'll just say here in this episode was one that was heavy and serious for me. Mm-hmm. I think that there were a lot of elements there that, as I said at the end of that episode, are sort of still I'm still working on. And I think that there were a lot of elements that were brought up there, particularly about us being women and what is difficult and beautiful in the whole topic of communal prayer. And we want to shift now for the next few episodes and really speak about particular mitzvot that are prominent in our religious lives. And we wanted to start with candle lighting, a mitzvah that is, I would say, kind of iconically associated with women. And we're going to get into more about why that is today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of all the mitzvot, candle lighting is one of those mitzvot that really brings up powerful images for people, powerful memories that are related to their home. For myself, I could say that some of my earliest imprinted memories definitely are of my mother, of my grandmother lighting candles. Like I remember going to my grandparents' apartment in the Bronx. They lived in Pelham Parkway, and standing next to my grandmother as she lit her candles. And I remember the way that she, waved her hands around before covering her eyes. I remember the tears that she would cry. And even as a young girl, I always knew that she was thinking about the family that she lost in the Holocaust, and that she was thinking about a daughter of hers who unfortunately passed away from a brain tumor when she was 3 years old. And it's not that she ever told me that. Like, I just knew, and I think for a lot of women, candle lighting is an emotional time where they're reflecting on the week that passed, or they're thinking about the week ahead, or they're concentrating on different tefillot that they have for themselves or their families or for the world. And as kids growing up watching mothers light, this could have intense impact on us. It's definitely an experience that I think many people remember. When I was little at camp, I went to this all-girls camp, Camp Sternberg, and there was this song that we used to sing that always made me very emotional that's connected to this. We'll link to it in the show notes, but it opens, "My dear Imma, I'm sending this letter to say the things I've never said of my impressions as your daughter." These thoughts are running through my head. And then the first stanza was, "As far back as I can remember, you said the Shema with me at night. Each week I saw you welcome Shabbos. I saw your candles burning bright." And that feeling of like that emotional feeling of like a young daughter watching her mother lighting candles, I think is part of why this mitzvah, even though we're going to see that it's not really a mitzvah only for women, it, as you said, is like iconically associated with women. It could be like because in the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, it tells us that this is one of 3 mitzvot that women have a special connection to. The other 2 are Hafashat Chala and Nida. And the Midrash, even as far back as Breshit Rabbah, tells us that Sari Menu had a Nir Daluk. She had a candle that was lit in her tent from Friday to Friday. So we see these sources of ours that very strongly associate this mitzvah with women. And at the same time, I really want to emphasize that the Shulchan Aruch states very clearly that Echad ha'anashim ve'echad ha'nashim chayavim liyot bevatehem nir daluk b'Shabbat, that men and women have an equal obligation of ensuring that candles are lit in their home for Shabbat, meaning that Hadlakat Nerot is an obligation that falls on the home in its entirety. And yet the halacha, we see, seems to give priority to women performing this mitzvah. And we see that that's pretty much been accepted across the board as something that women have typically taken on. Now, it could be that, as the Rambam notes, that women were more involved in caring for the needs of their homes. So somehow they ended up, just because, they were the ones in the home, being involved in this mitzvah. Or it could be, as the Midrash says, that maybe it's some kind of tikkun, some kind of way to rectify and add light to the world in response to the sin of Chava in Gan Eden. I know, but I have to say that because the Midrash says that it's a mitzvah that women took on as a response to the Chet in Gan Eden, specifically because the Chet took place on Friday afternoon. So however it came to be, it is a mitzvah that is now given priority to women, to the point that some sources say that a husband is not even allowed to take this away from his wife. Like, if he wants to, he can't, because this is his wife's mitzvah. So there are some homes where sometimes husbands like to take part in the mitzvah by setting up the candles and getting them ready, which I think is a nice minhag, and maybe also could help ease the pre-Shabbos tension if, that's something that works for a specific couple.
It's funny because in our home, one of my children actually sets the candles, but it's actually written in several sources that it would be nice for men to set up the candles, right? I guess it sort of gets
similar in Nida when it says like the man could keep the calendar.
Right.
Yeah, if it works for you, great, and if not, it's not something that is necessary.
Exactly. So if I could just go back for a moment to the piece about memory and where this sits with us, I will say this, that I didn't grow up lighting candles, which it sounds like also you didn't grow up lighting candles, right? But you watched the candles being lit. And what I do remember is that my mother had what we called a leichter, which is a word you use if you're from an Ashkenazi descending Eastern European home. And what's funny is that she told me that she received it when she got married, and it had 5 candle spots. And I remember saying to her, and we were 3 children in the family, so it worked. But I remember saying to myself, I said to her, what if you had less or more? I said, what exactly?
I also had one like that with 6 spots. And then when my 5th child was born, I needed to find something new.
So it was a funny thing.
I was thinking back and I was like, what was I thinking when I got married? Like, who promised me that?
Exactly. So it was a funny thing. And I remember thinking that when I was younger as well. For us, again, it worked out. But I would always wonder what was the correlation between that leichter and our family size. As I've grown, I guess, older or grown more into my, parental mothering space and trying to cultivate a home that had sort of intentional mitzvah observance, this particular mitzvah actually underwent a shift. Because I remember a few years back, I was speaking to a really good friend of mine. And I was speaking to her about the fact that I felt that my children weren't learning mitzvot with me or from me in particular. And she said, what do you mean? Like, they're growing up in your home. And I said, but I feel that there's not, and at that point I had 4 daughters and not also a son. And I said, I feel that as a mother of all these young ladies, that I don't feel that there's something that's ours particularly. It might have been also that, like, maybe they're going to shul with their father, or I just felt like it wasn't coming from me per se, and also things that were maybe also like female specific. And other than what I spoke about in a much earlier episode, that I would take them with me from a young age to the mikvah and Erev Yom Kippur, which isn't a mitzvah, it's just a minhag, that I sort of felt that like there wasn't something particular as me, their mother, and them as my daughters that was ours. And so she actually told me 2 things, and I'll mention both, even though one of them is only directly related to our conversation right now. The first one is that she sort of said that it sounds a little bit like you're separating your sort of professional Torah life, which for me is my profession, but for someone else it could be stam, the shiur they give on a Shabbat afternoon, that you're kind of separating, it feels like, your personal mitzvah life and your children's life, in the sense that kind of a lot of the mitzvot I was doing back then, it was kind of like, well, I would get it in when I wasn't doing the parenting thing. Right. And she kind of helped me realize that I was no longer in that stage, and that it would behoove all of us that this kind of be done together. And that was like a really,
integrate those aspects
exactly.
of your life.
And it wasn't like, well, let me get to shul when like so-and-so sleeping, like you're not in that stage anymore. So now it's time to like really integrate all those pieces together. And that was just like one of those good wake up calls that we often need in so many different stages of life, whether we're single and something isn't working, or we've shifted stages in all different moments of our lives. Like that was a really
paradigm shift. Change perspective.
And sometimes it takes someone from the outside to make us realize that. But the other thing she said to me was, why don't you light Shabbat candles with them? And that was also a shift for me because, again, I didn't grow up lighting candles. I didn't light candles until I was married. And so I didn't grow up with that concept. And it is important for me to say, for the sake of this conversation, that Rafi is my very close Chabad friend, hardcore Chabad, born and bred. And both of these were powerful for me because I also know how deeply they're rooted in the Chabad world, meaning the idea of your home is the center of your mitzvah life, and the home is where you bring both obviously your family and all of your guests into that space. And also the idea about lighting candles. And this specifically also relates to a campaign that came out in the mid-'70s in the Chabad world that was really spearheaded by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he really encouraged people to make an effort to light with their daughters, meaning whether or not that was your minhag or not. This also is the root of seeing young women hand out candles right on the street.
On the streets in New York.
Exactly. I've been at weddings that were relatively secular weddings, but they were on a Friday, and then they handed out candles at the wedding. And this is rooted,
something
most of this.
about
Yeah, mamash beautiful. It's rooted in this Chabad idea. So ever since then, all of my children, we light candles together, and we've created rituals around it. We sing V'zakeni L'Gadel together. And I guess we'll talk more about that personal experience later. But as a family, it underwent a shift from that moment.
So beautiful. And I think it really touches on how this mitzvah can affect the entire house, and not just be your own personal mitzvah, but it is, as we said, a chovad habayit. It's a mitzvah in the house, and you could bring the household into that. So there's actually 3 different reasons why we light candles. Kavod Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat, and Shalom Bayit. I want to talk a little bit about each one of them. Kavod Shabbat refers to the category of actions that we do before Shabbat in order to prepare for Shabbat and to show how much we respect this day and how seriously we take it. So cleaning the house or setting a nice table, showering and putting on nice clothes or putting on makeup, or things like that, are a way of showing Kavod for Shabbat. And lighting candles so that the room is well lit and has a nice feel is another act of Kavod Shabbat, which maybe we don't realize because we live in a time where we have electricity. But when candlelight was the only way to light up a room, so that was really like a way of showing the respect that you had for Shabbat. So that's Kavod. Oneg Shabbat are the activities that we do on Shabbat to increase our enjoyment of the day. So when a room is lit and we could enjoy each other's company and we could see each other and we could see the food that we're eating, which affects how it tastes, all of that is part of Oneg Shabbat, and that's why the candles are typically placed either on the table or near the table. It's a special feature, actually, of Hadlakat Nerot that it has both of these, because usually things that we do for Shabbat are either Kavod before or they're Oneg on, and actually Hadlakat Nerot has both aspects. And the third reason that we light is Shalom Bayit, which means creating a feeling of peacefulness in the house. And this also, because we have electricity, we don't think of so much, but if the house is dark and people are tripping and falling and there's tension in the air, so that's not a peaceful feeling. And when we light candles and we add the light to the room, so that is part of what we're doing in this action of helping the house feel like calmer and more tranquil, which is something that we only really experience maybe in our day and age when there's a blackout at night, and then you're like, okay, and everyone's stressed. So we could understand that a little bit. And if there's ever been, I remember times where there have been blackouts on Friday night and the house is completely dark and you can't put on flashlights and the only thing that you have are the Shabbat candles, and then you actually really appreciate this aspect of the mitzvah. So in a way, we could say that the mitzvah of candle lighting maybe had more of a functional aspect to it at a time where there wasn't electricity. And yet, over the generations, Jewish women have seized on this mitzvah and kind of tried to amplify its meaning, that it's not only functional. So we see all different kinds of examples. One of them is that really, 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 only one candle has to be lit. And single women sometimes when they're lighting with, I don't know, I'm assuming that's what your girls do,
one candle.
Right? They light one candle. the Ravya, an early Ashkenazi authority, he writes that many women light at least two. Now, it could be to capture like the duality of the shamor v'zachor, that we say that Shabbat has both aspects of, remembering it and also keeping it. But those two candles are already something extra. It could also be that women wanted to show, like one candle would be to light up the room. That's functional. But two candles is because there's something spiritual here. There's a ritual aspect, and they wanted to preserve that symbolism. And the Ravya even goes further, and I didn't know this actually until preparing for this episode. He says that actually this is why it's sometimes preferable as a minhag to keep the two candles separate from additional candles. So you'll see, like in some homes, two candles are like bigger, and then if there's additional candles, maybe they're smaller, so that when people look at it, they see the shamor v'zachor aspect to it. That's not a requirement, but it is really interesting. And it hit me when I was preparing for this episode how much there's often a gap between what the halacha requires in this area, whether how many candles or when a woman should be lighting, to what women are actually doing. We're going to see that there's a lot of situations where women may not have to light at all. Yeah. And yet women pretty much have taken upon themselves and insisted on lighting every week no matter what. And I think it's because it's something very personal. Like we're talking about, it's something deeply meaningful. It's something that we know also throughout the ages. We've seen that women have held on to this, like even during the Inquisition. Talk about the women who were, lighting in secret, or generations later, women who thought of themselves as non-Jews, but they had this like custom of going down on Friday afternoon to the basement and lighting candles, and they didn't even know why, but that's what they saw their mothers and their grandmothers do. And it was something that they held on to even when they were forced to relinquish their mitzvot. And when I try to think about like, why is it? Like, what is that power? I think, I don't know, but it might be connected to almost like this magical feeling that sometimes we associate with how the Katne wrote, that feeling of like the house could be absolutely crazy. People are screaming at each other. People are in and out of the showers. Things are in the oven. The kitchen's a mess. There's tension in the air. And then you light those candles. And what we're hoping for is that even though a second ago maybe everything was nuts, like it's now Shabbos. You can't be involved in those malacha things anymore. And there's kind of like a kind of, calm that just settles over the house, that palace in time feeling that Heschel refers to it, or at least that's what we're hoping for. Doesn't always happen, but I think that is the reason that maybe Hadlakat Nerut is thought of as like this special moment, because it brings in Shabbos, and those first few moments of Shabbos are like, that's it with the cell phones, that's it with the work, that's it, Shabbos.
I think it's also worth mentioning, and I don't mean at all to take away from the uniqueness of this mitzvah, but candles make their way into many elements in the world, meaning candles and lights are things that add a sense of spirituality, a sense of tranquility. It's used, right? I don't know.
A romantic dinner.
Romantic dinner, or, those who grew up in a world where Christianity was around, right? Lights are used in all different ways in that way. But I'm saying even specifically in spaces of worship. And I think that it's worth also, we're going to talk about obviously the specifics of in our Jewish home, but I think it's worth mentioning in terms of like, why is this something that people love? Like there's something really, I don't know exactly what it is. It's uplifting. There's something uplifting about
bringing light into the world.
Bringing light into the world in a way I would even say that's very accessible, right? Meaning bringing light into the world with your mitzvot, or bringing light into the world with your actions. I would say it's harder. This is I keep going back to the word, right, about concrete gestures, but it's like this concrete action you can do that immediately shifts something in the atmosphere. And I think it's worth noticing that we're not the only tradition in the world that's noticed that. But obviously for us, it has to do specifically with Shabbat. By the way, that idea from the Ravia of having the two main and then all the small ones, never knew that was written anywhere, but that's also what I have.
Yeah,
Meaning
me too.
I think most of what I see often is that, right? People who do add for children, if that's their stage of life, that's mostly what I've seen, but I had actually no idea.
Unless you have that lighter that has, all of it part of the candelabra that has all of them together.
So I actually just wanted to pause for a moment and to look at where this mitzvah hits us in reality, right? Meaning we're going to get back to also...
You always have to take us down.
I don't mean to, but I think
it's so important.
I think it's worth
real
mentioning.
life. That's what we're here to talk about.
Exactly, right? Because we're here to talk about the experience behind the mitzvah. And, I'm going to just throw in this memory. I was at a show of Shuli Rand, who's a phenomenal Israeli singer, performer. And before he had become religious, he was saying that he spent Shabbat somewhere, and he's part of the image he had built up inside of his own heart about what life would look like when he would become religious and have a family is that, you would light the candles and the home would be perfect and tranquil. And he had a whole song about the fact that that is not what his home looked like at that stage, and how it had been kind of like a, in Hebrew we say chalom v'shivro, like you had the dream and the reality between what he had thought. So I just want to talk a minute about that reality piece, because you mentioned it before, sort of on the halachic side, but candlelighting is a transitional moment. It is impactful before Shabbat, meaning we prepare the candles and we're engaging in the mitzvah, and then the lighting of the candles actually is a transitional moment into Shabbat itself. Now, transitional moments in general, Shayna, are often chaotic a little bit, right, or stressful. So I think that it's worth thinking about if this depicts what is happening in our listeners', home life at the moment in their stage of life. I think it's worth thinking about it for a moment, because I know, let's say, a general goal of in our home is a whole Friday situation, meaning the whole Friday is a day that I feel, and I hear this a lot around me also, it's a day that can be difficult because of the flow of the day, the shortness of the day. For some people, it's because they're working mamash until they have to then bring in Shabbat. For some people, it might be because the stage of life is that you have, maybe kids coming home earlier and combining it with work and figuring out how to cook and get ready and get the house ready. And the time management element of Friday is, the struggle is real, right? It's really, really hard. And the more a household struggles, even let's say with organization, Friday is going to be really, really rough. So I think that it's maybe worth thinking about how one could make that process simpler, whether it's because it's a very stark contrast from work into Shabbat, or because it's work or family into Shabbat, about how to maybe reorganize that day. There's not always a good answer, right? We're constantly trying to reconfigure these things. And I also just want to put a specific Israeli piece in here for our listeners in Israel, which is that Friday is in my opinion, an extra special challenge because we don't have Sundays here.
Right.
And so I feel a tremendous need that Friday is not only a Shabbat prep, but it's also supposed to be enjoyable. We're supposed to do something fun.
A lot of people don't work on Fridays in Israel,
Right.
and kids get out early. So that idea of let's take them out somewhere or do something with them.
Or by the way, as a couple, I know people in the particular stages of life that they are going out on Friday mornings, meaning that's a time to spend time together. That's really difficult when you also have to prepare Shabbat. And so I just want to put that out there, kind of a little bit like what I said before, that my friend Rifki helped me notice that my perspective on my work life and home life wasn't necessarily so accurate anymore, that sometimes it's worth taking a good look at how we're organizing our day.
Also, there's a lot of
how much pressure there is.
There's also a lot of special events that happen here on Fridays because there's no Sundays. So sometimes there's even a wedding on a Friday morning, or there's just, a special lecture and activity in the community, and it's really hard to balance it all. It's a really good point.
Totally. And even the question of, when does one do their Shabbat prep itself, right? I think that's also been something that's been a struggle for us. I don't love the feeling that Shabbat actually, and I'm familiar with the machloket of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, but I don't love the idea that it takes over my entire week before. So I actually prefer to push it as close to Shabbat as possible. And these things, they can be a little bit complex. But again, I think advanced planning is definitely helpful in this regard. One more piece that I would want to put out there is the idea about our expectations for how Shabbat has to look. This is definitely a machloket in my own home, right? I would be perfectly fine basically having the same Shabbat menu pretty often. I happen to be married to someone who it's very important to him that there is a lot of diversification and creativity. He's the one who's doing that, right? But it's important for him. And sometimes they'll have to be it's okay. We can just have cholent for lunch. Do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be something so complex. And another thing I'll say, and this is, again, I feel this challenge living in Israel with the Friday situation, is that it definitely makes me think twice about having company, because I don't have recovery time after, right? Shabbat ends and immediately the next morning I'm working.
Yeah.
And so,
Even Saturday night is so different when you know that you have to pack everyone's bags or finish the homework or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It changes the whole, I miss that almost more than I miss Sundays.
Yeah.
I miss that Saturday night, just relaxing time.
Exactly. So I think that that's also worth thinking about. Sometimes the stress that can create the chaos on the Friday into the candlelighting moment, sometimes it could be this expectation of how Shabbat has to look, and sometimes we need to chill out on an expectation. It might be worth thinking about how, again, not every week could be something different, but I feel like almost every week we think a little bit anew about how we want that weekend to go. It doesn't always go the way we want, but it's something that I think it's worth thinking about, so that candlelighting moment can actually be peaceful.
It's definitely not always the serene moment that picture, in our head. And I, for example, I guess we're different in this way. Like, I like to have everything kind of done in advance, and I try to do all my cooking on Thursday so that Friday could just be open and free. I even set the table on Thursday night, which is something that I got from my mother.
Yeah, my mom also did
the
that.
the whole house feels like whatever, but there's something, you see the table set, and it's an illusion, but it at least gives a sense of like that things are in order. And still, somehow, I'm never ready. I never light the candles on time. Like those 18 minutes, thank God for them, because I'm not one of those people. Like, things come up, the phone rings, I realized I forgot to do this. And I'm like, how is this possible? I did everything yesterday. Why am I still in that crunch and down to the wire? Now, this is also the way the house I grew up in was like. So, Imma, if you're listening, I feel comforted that this is my Masorah. But my mother always says that her mother was always sitting with a hot drink at the table calmly before she lit.
I've been in a few homes like that. It's very impressive.
Yeah, so amazing. I mean, I would want to say that I aspire for that, but I have a few other things to get to before I get to that. I do, though, once I light, I do try to slow down and really be present in those few minutes. So until then, and the moments leading up to that, it's definitely not typically serene. But once I light, and now like it's Shabbos already, the opportunity to say some tefillot, and that is also something that goes already back to the Gemara. The Gemara talks about this idea of women lighting candles, reciting a tefillah to have children who will light up the world with their Torah. So that very popular song that you mentioned before, V'zakenu legadel banim uvnei banim, that are me'irim et ha'olam. That's something that a lot of women have the custom to say if they are lighting candles and they're married and they have children. Single women, by the way, can also say this prayer, and they could omit the mention of a husband, or they could choose, some women choose to keep in mind a future husband, this idea of like davening for a spouse that's out there, even if you are not married yet, if that feels right to you. But I do want to just take a moment to note that because of the strong association that many people have between candlelighting and davening for family, or it was their mothers and they were the children, and that's what they think of when they are lighting candles. If a woman is single and she's lighting candles in her own apartment or with the friends that she lives with, sometimes, not for all women, it depends on the situation, it depends on a lot of different personal factors, but sometimes there can be a pain, or there could be a longing in that experience, because it's that feeling of like something is missing, or this isn't how I imagined lighting candles, or this isn't the situation I thought I would be in. And I want those women, to feel seen, and to know that like their halachic nirud is valuable, and the fact that they continue to do it even though it may cause pain is something significant. And also to know that those tefillot that sometimes we daven in a moment of pain and are really heartfelt, like those are also very, very, very significant. So when we lean into the pain and we don't deny it, but we use it as an opportunity to daven from that place, that's also something that I think is can be special. Many women in general use this time to say all different kinds of tefillot, not just tefillot for children and for family, but, in the war right now, there was a huge effort to have women light candles and to say different tefillot. Cards were given out with special tefillot for the hostages, for soldiers, for those who were injured, for those who needed, whatever special
For the victims of
attention.
October 7th.
Yeah,
also,
for the victims, for people who needed, their homes that were evacuated, all different kinds of things. And there's also organizations that have published different kinds of special tefillot. So there's an organization called Yesh Tikva, which provides support to Jewish couples navigating infertility and realizing that this could be a tough time for women who are married, who don't have children. They put out a special tefillah that a woman could say when she lights candles when she's facing a fertility challenge. And then there's all different other minhagim that I've developed, such as giving tzedakah right before you light candles and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going back to a piece you said earlier about the fact that candle lighting is this mitzvah that we really latched other things onto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, and I think it just shows that it's obviously a meaningful meeting point for people in their religious lives. I'll just add one piece to that, while it's even more particular than the examples you mentioned, but it was very impactful on me when I realized that I know women who have children who haven't survived. Either they were babies who were born and were not viable, or young children who died. And I actually, with one person I know in particular, I discovered that because I was at her house for Shabbat and I counted her candles. And I was like, oh, you're lighting an extra candle. And she said, well, I had another child. And I think that, like, if you look at that moment and it could be, again, beautiful, magical, and it also could be a moment that is either reminding us of a situation of life that we might wish would be different, or a moment to remember.
Yeah, a
right?
moment that you give space.
Yeah,
to
you give
this.
space to that. And that if it's a mitzvah that we've made into one that represents our home, that for many there's all different elements that could be accessed through that mitzvah. I wanted to talk about an element of Hadlakat Nerot that I think is a source of anxiety for many women, which is the question of, if you ever forgot to light. It's like the threat that hangs over the head, right, of women. It's one of these big fears that you'll somehow forever have to add a candle. So I just wanted to sort of fill in the contours of what that looks like and where that comes from, because we don't generally have that in our mitzvah life. Like, if you miss an opportunity, then it was an opportunity missed, but it's not like a fine for the rest of your life. It's not a parking ticket. The Maharil, who's a halachic authority that we mentioned in an earlier episode, was a 15th century German Rav, halachist, and he also really has an important collection of German minhagim, of Ashkenazi customs, that he had instructed a woman once who did not like candles, she should add extra oil to each candle, right? And many of us don't actually use oil, but we'll get to that soon. And many women embrace this, but they sort of developed a more stringent custom to add a candle on all subsequent Shabbatot. Okay, so this seems, again, to be a more female-created idea. The Ramah, the Rav Moshe Isserlis, who was commenting on this custom that already had become ubiquitous apparently in his time. And he really did not like this custom, and he criticizes it initially in his Tshuvot, which is the Deracheha Moshe. And he thinks that any kind of fasting or like tshuva for not lighting candles is really just overkill, right? It's not really appropriate. And also the idea of adding. And he also didn't like it because if you add a candle, this also tells you that it's not necessarily that was one lit for each kid then, but then you lose the Sachor and Shamor idea because you have a third candle there. But Dafka, as the Ramah writing his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he's not as negative about the custom.
Meaning once he actually writes the bottom line.
Yeah, so he leaves space for it. But again, this is not an obligation in the way that I think many women kind of assume it to be. And also it's really important to notice that realistically, if this is done, it's because there was a real negligence, but not because someone was sick or I don't know, maybe they gave birth on a Friday afternoon, right? Meaning it's not, that's not the case we're talking about. It's more of a negligence. And it also seems to be that it was rooted in a feeling of a real guilt that I guess women had for not fulfilling this mitzvah. It's also just really important to remember that the woman doesn't have to light the candles. It's a mitzvah on the home. So whoever's in the home at that moment, whatever her home is, they can fulfill that mitzvah. I'll also just say as a sidebar, as like a little personal memory, which is that the year that I said Kaddish my father, that there were many Shabbatot in the winter that I didn't light candles on Shabbat because I was rushing to shul. We didn't live close to a shul at that point. I was rushing to shul to get there for Kaddish for Mincha, and it was just very chaotic. And I remember the first time my husband said to me, like, "I'll just light candles," and I was like,
What?
I don't know. I think that's wrong. I mean, I knew luckily it wasn't wrong
Yeah.
but it happened. It happened quite a bit that year that he lit
That's
the candles.
why it's so important to know these things, because
Yeah.
sometimes they are, necessary to use, or it would be the right thing to use them.
Exactly. So I felt in that moment that my right thing to do was to go to shul and say Kaddish, and he lit the candles. So just one other piece I want to say about this question of being unable or almost forgetting to light, that if there were electric lights on, which is true in almost all of our homes nowadays, right? And the lights weren't, the Shabbat candles weren't lit, that also, even according to this, what we see minhag that's taken on a life of its own, also really saves a woman, so to speak, from having to light another candle, because as you said earlier, the shalom bayit element of people being able to see and function hasn't been sacrificed just because she forgot to light candles. And again, there are different opinions on this. Some say that that's enough, some say it's not enough, but it's important to note that if there's a woman out there who's been lighting an extra candle for a very long time and it's something that causes tremendous pain for her, then it's worth thinking about, like, what happened then? Do you need to be doing
and
this?
asking
Asking
what
those
to
questions.
do at this point. Yeah, I remember that there was a time that we were at my parents' for the weekend, and my daughter really wasn't feeling well right before Shabbat, and everyone else left. Like my parents and my husband and my boys, they all left for shul, and I was busy helping her, and I just really couldn't leave her alone. Like she was nauseous. I don't know. She really didn't feel well, and all of a sudden I looked at my watch and I realized that Shabbos had started, and I hadn't lit candles, and I was so upset. I was like devastated. How could this have happened? I don't want to light an extra candle for the rest of my life. I was actively helping my daughter. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm being punished, so to speak. And then my husband showed me this tshuva of Rav Ovadia Yosef that, you're referring to, where he says that if there's like light in the house and there's a reason like why you didn't end up lighting, that there are definitely opinions who say that you don't have to add an extra candle. So I didn't, and that was a very big relief for me. And also, as we said, the primary obligation of candle lighting is one that falls on the household. It's this chovat habayit, and it's obligation on the house more than any individual, that the house should have candles in it. So given that that's the case, I want to raise like a few different very common scenarios that come up in our lives with regard to this question of like whether you need to light in specific situations. And now, of course, obviously practice can vary, and anyone who's listening who has a question is always encouraged to ask their personal, rabbi what they should do and what he holds. But I think there are some, situations that are worth discussing here.
Yeah, because they're really common.
Yeah, they come up all the time. One is if a member of the household isn't going to be home for Shabbat. So let's say my daughter is going to her friend for Shabbos. So she doesn't need to light candles because in our house, I'm home and I'm lighting candles for our household. And in her friend's house where she's being hosted, the mom, let's say, is lighting candles or someone's lighting candles in the house. So she doesn't have to worry about that. If she's sleeping in her own room or like in her own suite, which is considered kind of like her own bayit in a way. So then it would be nice if she put on some electricity, a nightlight, a Shabbos lamp, a hall light or something without a bracha to show that also, she's thinking about some light in that area. But usually when a household member goes away for Shabbat, they don't have to worry. If someone lives in a dorm, however, let's say you have women in a midrashah, or in a college, or guys in a yeshiva or something like that, because they do have their own pretty permanent living situation, and that's where they live. So then they do have a chiyuv more to light for their bayit. Now, in this kind of situation, usually everyone's eating together in some kind of dining room. So what's best is to have somebody light in the dining room so that there's candles where we're eating for the oneg Shabbat, and everyone's yosei through that. And then in each of their individual rooms to put on a light in the common space in the bathroom or whatever, and to have in mind that this is, something that they're doing as part of this chiyuv. They do that without a bracha. The last situation that I want to mention that comes up a lot is, let's say you're sleeping in your own home. You're not away. You're sleeping in your own home, but you're eating out Friday night, which comes up if you're invited to a friend's, neighbor's house for dinner. It comes up if there's some event. You're at a bar mitzvah and you're all eating together in the shul, or Shabbat brachot, or there's a shul event or something like that. Then again, as long as there's candles lit where you are going to be eating that provide oneg Shabbat for all who are present, there's actually no need for each individual woman to light candles there, which is fascinating because that is so not what we see done. You come to these places and there's always a table that's set up with, and sometimes at my daughter's bat mitzvah and at my son's bar mitzvah, the person, shout out to Anat Bazak, who's really spectacular at decor and setting up. So she really loved the idea of having a very special, beautifully decorated table for Hadlakat Nerod, and it was gorgeous, but really halachically, it's not necessary. What is important to know is that in your own home where you're going to be sleeping, you do need to have candles lit. So this could mean that you light candles before you go out and you enjoy them a little bit, and and then you won't be there for the meal, but the home has candles. It could be that you light candles that will be lit long enough that you could enjoy them after you return from the meal. Or if it's a situation where you're concerned to leave the house with a fire burning, so then when you put on lights or you set a timer for Shabbat or whatever, and again, check in with your rabbi, but it could be that we could rely on that. So there's a lot of different things that come up, and it is interesting that it is a different experience to light candles in the privacy of your home by yourself on your own. And for many women who light more than 2 candles, they don't do that when they're somewhere else. So at home, I light 7 candles because I have 5 children. But when I'm out and I'm going to be lighting somewhere else, then I only light 2. And I've noticed that on the one hand, there is something special and meaningful about lighting next to other women and everyone's saying tefillot and everyone's covering their eyes. There's a power that comes in that. And at the same time, I miss lighting those other candles, or I also miss the intimacy kind of that moment of lighting in my home. So there's a lot of different situations that we find ourselves as women in, lighting candles, and sometimes we don't always have to light them. So just knowing that we don't need to feel pressure, even if it's something that women have taken on, is something that's important.
In our conversation, Shayna, we've been talking kind of elliptically about electric lights. When we say electric lights, and this is also one of these really common scenarios, so I want to bring it up, it actually could refer to 2 different things. On one hand, up until now, we spoke about the fact that there's lights on in the house. So, if someone forgot to light candles, then they could rely on the lights. But there's actually 2 different items within electric lights that comes up that's significant when it comes to Shabbat candles. The first is can somebody light electric candle lights? Which we often don't think about because it's just, what can I say? It's not it's not a common thing in religious life for the reasons that we'll talk about in a moment.
It doesn't feel traditional.
Exactly. It doesn't feel traditional. It's funny, by the way, because in theory, I love the idea of having a dark house with lights on, but I'm also very fire scared. I don't know, I guess growing up in the States. And so I ordered on Amazon at some point, a whole set of these, they're electric and they look like a burning candle, and they're really good quality. So they're really fun. My kids make fun of them, but I think they're really fun. So that's a question. Many of us are used to either silver or ceramic or glass candlesticks. But the question becomes, once that became a concept, and certainly in a world where there's a fire safety question, so can we just use electric candlesticks? Okay, so there's two different questions that I think are significant to talk about, and these questions really come up, especially as you kind of also mentioned, in whether in a hotel or maybe even in a hospital, right? That this comes up very often.
Where they don't let you light in the room.
Exactly, they won't let you light in the room, except if it's in Israel, and then there's a big tray of candles in the middle. No,
in the dining room, but they won't let you light in your own personal room.
Oh no, not in your own.
Some people don't follow that rule, but really you're not allowed to.
I know. I meant that in a general area that they will have sort of a tray laid out there. So it's worth mentioning that the traditional structure of lighting, as is explained in the Mishnah, is using oil, right? Ideally, it's olive oil or any other good smelling oil. Bad smelling oils is a problem because it's looked at as defeating the purpose. We actually say those Mishnayot on Friday night, and that it's supposed to have a wick. And so when electricity comes into the world, the halachic question became: is it like that? Meaning, is it a structure that's similar to the idea of oil along with a wick. And so here there's really a debate about between poskim, right? So the general assumption of in the whole debate about electricity, which is a question also about all these different Shabbat questions, is that electricity is fire. Okay, meaning it does have the malacha of lighting, but the question is it similar enough to a candle to be used, let's say, in a candlelighting situation? So many of the poskim agreed that one can fulfill the obligation of lighting candles with like an incandescent bulb. Now, it's worth mentioning that, let's say, many of us today are using lead,
right,
and that's no longer an incandescent bulb.
Right.
Okay, it's not that. Incandescent bulb is, I grew up with them, right? Or
light bulbs,
right?
Yeah.
So, but many of us we don't have that necessarily as much in our home, and that would be considered lighting a fire, and it would be able to be used on Shabbat. Although, again, for most, it's assumed to be a b'diavad, meaning we ideally want a candle with a wick, etc. So that would be okay. In terms of a room that has electricity and candles, which is another interesting question. If I've already put the light on in the room, then thinking about all the ideas you said before about kavod Shabbat and about shalom bayit, so like maybe we don't even need candles because we already have a light on. And if that light is considered electricity, then what's the point of lighting a candle? Now, again, we already said through this episode that people and women in particular are so connected to this, so it's so clear to them. But there's actually a halachic question. Wait a minute. If the lights are on in the room, then maybe lighting candles doesn't actually do anything. In a hotel room where everybody's eating together, we already mentioned the idea that most of the time we light in the dining area where everybody is eating. But the question becomes, what about within the room that you're sleeping in? Meaning, should you be doing something else in that room? And so here we have sort of two different options. One option is, I also didn't know this, apparently Machon Somet, which is an institution here in Alon Shvut where we're recording, which has all different Shabbat solutions. They actually have electric candles that are halachically looked at as permissible for lighting for Shabbat,
Right.
and a person could take that with them
Like
to
a little
their
travel
set that you could take with you, and they're not creating any danger and not going against any fire safety rules, and you could light it in your room. But there are many who actually just do that light, they put a light on in their room. So as you said before, ideally an incandescent light, right? Meaning a light bulb in the room, maybe in a night light that's there, and you put that on for Shabbat. You could have in mind that it's for Shabbat. If they're not going to be lighting candles in the dining room, there's going to be a question if they make a bracha on that light.
Right.
And that's different for different traditions. And if they're going to be lighting in a dining room, then they'll make the bracha there, but that they have that element within their room of where they're staying that is essentially lighting candles in the place that they will need the light later on.
These are, it feels very technical, all these details, and yet these are situations that come up for people all the time. Anytime that somebody is away, or anytime someone's in a hotel, or people that are in a hospital. And it's important. The articles on the site are great on this, so you could look further into that, or you could ask specific questions. One other aspect of Halakat Nirot that I wanted to mention is that I think many women, myself included, they experience lighting Shabbat candles as the act of accepting Shabbat. This is when I'm accepting Shabbat, and that's why I try at least to be ready and dressed for Shabbat before I light. But there are many other opinions that say that candle lighting itself is not necessarily an act of accepting Shabbat, because if it was, then once we would light one candle, it would be Shabbat, and we wouldn't be able to light that second candle or any other additional candles. So even the putting out the match afterwards, or the candle that you were using to light the other candles, would be an issue. So because of that, it seems that a lot of people accept that it's not the lighting, so much, but it's the bracha that we say afterwards. And even then, it could be that the other members of the household choose not to accept Shabbat at that point. So if there's people who are going to shul, they may accept Shabbat when they daven Kabbalat Shabbat. I think a lot of men, that's usually when they have in mind that they're accepting Shabbat. Someone could just say, I'm being Makabel Shabbat. Now, I'm mentioning this because sometimes a woman lights those candles and it's like, the bathroom light isn't on, or the phone's ringing, and other members of the household can, and she could even ask them. It's okay for her to ask them to do those malachot because they have not yet accepted Shabbat. also the whole question of when do you say the bracha is connected to this, because usually we say brachot when we do a mitzvah before we do the mitzvah, because we have this concept called over the asiyatan, that we like to say a bracha prior to performing actual mitzvah act. But there's a machloket when it comes to candle lighting. So the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and many Sephardi women will do that. They'll say the bracha, and then they'll light the candles, and then the acceptance of Shabbos kind of happens after all of that. Whereas Ashkenazi poskim feel that, wait, if we now just said that it's the saying the bracha that is really the acceptance of Shabbat, so then you're going to say the bracha, then it's going to be Shabbat. You can't light the candles. So many Ashkenazi women, they light the candles. Then they kind of, wave their arms, their hands around, and they cover their eyes as if almost to, say they cover their eyes when they say the bracha, as if to kind of make it seem as if, oh, we said the bracha, and only now, am I going to benefit from the candles after I uncover my eyes, as if somehow I said the bracha before lighting them. So that is a practice that you see. I'm still not sure where the waving comes from. I don't know what that is connected
am right
to.
Now, as I listen to you, that's for the first time I'm connecting that we're saying to ourselves that we're not benefiting from the light. I honestly,
Yes.
I never knew
that's
that,
a big
Shayna,
part of what
which
it
is also
is.
why on Yom Tov you don't do that, because on Yom Tov we don't have the same prohibition of lighting.
Right, you could light.
Exactly.
You could light a fire on Yom Tov.
From a pre-existing flame.
Yeah.
But I honestly never connected those pieces.
But as we're talking, I'm like, wait, but the hand waving thing, I'm still not sure what that's about.
It's a spiritual motion, Shayna.
It's a spiritual motion?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm making it up.
Like someone could just cover their eyes and that's
maybe.
okay?
I think so. Yeah, I think they could.
Sometimes you see it, like it's very dramatic. So,
one other piece that I think is also significant to mention here, which also comes up all the time, is the question about lighting on al t'nai, like lighting conditionally. And it has to do with this exact question, meaning if I lit candles and I accepted Shabbat, but I need to do something else afterwards, so how is that going to work? And so classic cases are if we have to drive somewhere before Shabbat, but you need to be lighting in your home.
Let's say Erev Yom Kippur comes up for a lot of women, for sure in America.
Because they want to
because
drive
women
to
live
shul.
far from shul.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily always go on Friday night. Yom Kippur night, everyone's going and everyone has to light candles. So many women light candles having in mind that they're now going to get into the car to drive to shul because otherwise it's a 20-minute walk. So so what do they do in that case?
Okay, so in these cases, we light al t'nai, meaning we light and we basically say to ourselves that we're not accepting Shabbat with the lighting, but we're going to accept it, let's say, with the tzibur in the tefillah, right? But that we're not accepting it at that moment. Another classic for me, this comes up almost every week, which is that if I haven't davened mincha yet, and then there's a halachic question, can I have a mincha if I lit candles? They've already declared that it's the next day already, so I can't say mincha.
And the belongs to the afternoon of Friday.
Exactly. So that one comes up for me all the time.
Yeah.
And so also this past week, because I had also been thinking about this episode, I was like makpid to light al t'nai because I hadn't davened mincha yet.
I mean, so you light and you have in mind that
I'm not accepting Shabbat yet.
And I'm gonna daven and then I'm gonna. Why is that better than davening mincha and then just lighting after that?
Well, ideally I should, but I was already too late. I couldn't.
No, I'm saying, but if you still have time, okay, because I guess also like maybe the 18 minutes, like some people want to just make sure not to light at the last moment.
Yeah, and also if by the time I would have walked to shul, I would have also missed mincha. Meaning there was like a timing issue there that I couldn't get around. Obviously, ideally you say mincha much earlier, but that is also classic, and sometimes women need to light al t'nai for that reason. So I'll just add one more piece here, which connects to the idea that you mentioned before, which is a very significant halachic idea of over le'asiyatan, that usually we say a bracha before we do the mitzvah. So if one is lighting al t'nai and they're essentially not accepting Shabbat, so they, in theory, might ideally say the bracha first and then light, because anyways you're not yet accepting fully. And so here we have difference of opinions, difference of Sephardi, Ashkenazi, what might be the psak in different cases. I think many women that I know, if they have to light al t'nai, keep the structure and the way that they're familiar with it.
They still say the bracha
after. But again, this is an interesting question to think about if it's relevant for you. Okay, Shayna, what's your takeaway from this conversation?
There's so many different aspects that we touched on that I'm trying to organize in my brain and think about what are the things that are really sticking out for me. And I think that there's two. One is the very special role that women have played over time in really shaping what has become common practice when it comes to Hadlakat Road. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, about women's connection and commitment to this mitzvah and their just overwhelming desire to light candles. Don't tell me I don't need to. I want to light candles. Maybe it's connected to the bringing light into the world or to adding that just special feeling or to having the opportunity to daven and to say tefillot. Whatever it is, I think it's something unique in this mitzvah that women have been so actively involved. And the second thing is really thinking about how to use the moment of candle lighting as an opportunity to reflect. Like to really reflect. We don't always have the moments to stop. Our lives are so busy and so filled with so many things. And taking those first few moments of Shabbat to think back on the past week and to think about what happened and what am I grateful for, and to look ahead to where would I like Hashem's help in the upcoming days are ways for us to connect to ourselves and to Hashem at a moment that already is considered very significant. What about you?
I think on all the different halachic pieces that we brought today, the one that I really want everyone listening to remember is to remember that it's a mitzvah in the household, and that if there's a scenario that's become very stressful, or usually it's a weekly situation, right? It's something that maybe happens once in a while, but it's really important to keep that in mind so that there aren't women around carrying like guilt that I don't know. There are all these different stories like that I think I've heard throughout the lifetime. And I think that that's something I really want. I want everyone to remember, and that it's okay. It's okay that if one Shabbat it was fulfilled by somebody else in the household. At the same time, I also want to tag on to that last piece you said about the meaning of this mitzvah. I think that for me, it's probably one of two, but that it's that moment where like we say Shema Kolenu every day, but I usually don't actually ask for things for myself. I sometimes maybe it's the rush of the morning, or it doesn't always happen in that space. But this is a space that I never give up on it. Do you know what I'm saying? Of having a personal tefillah. I know that there were friends of mine for all different reasons that I davened for so many years, or family members, and certainly in the past 2 years it was a moment that I will say connected me more to Am Yisrael, like in that moment. And as you said, it's sort of an opportunity to just stop for a moment and to think about that which we have and that which we wish was here. And I think that for me, that's a meaningful moment in the week, that even when there is chaos, I do a pretty decent job of just ignoring it, because I don't want it to interfere with this moment of candlelighting.
Yeah. Thank you. Shiniska.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance with all of them. You can contact us with thoughts and questions at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. That's womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.